Hi friends, this is Prasanjit. I welcome all of you to my channel Mule for Learn from D. So today's topic is mule flows. Here we are about to discuss about the type of mule flows which we deal during the development of any mule project. Okay. And also we will discuss about calling and observing mule flows. And then we will observe how these sections, attributes, payloads, and variables are passed from one flow to another flow during calling a flow from one flow to another. Okay. And then we are about to uh, cover four scenarios here. First, as you can see, call subflow from public flow. We will call one flow from another flow, and we will see how it behaves. So I'll come here, and if you see, these are the flows which I have uh, designed for you, and I want to show you how actually a flow looks like. Okay, so before that, let me show you what is the flow structure. So whenever we create a flow, if you just type in mule palette flow, then from here we can take this flow and we can create it, or there are some other options also to create flow. Okay, so now if you see, if we these are the parts. Here I have mentioned parts of mule flow. So here if you see source, process, and error handling. So a mule flow contains three sections. First is source, then second is process, and then error handling section. Now the minimum requirement for a mule flow is that it has to have minimum one processor in it. Okay, so if a mule flow is not having any processor in it, then that flow will not be considered as a valid flow in mule. Okay, so this is the minimum requirement for a mule flow, to deploy it. Okay, so that is the thing. Let's move on different flows. So as you can see here, this is the public flow. So this is the public flow I have mentioned here. So public flow means, let me go to this one. Public flow means when there will be a listener in the source section. That means a public flow is having some component in the source section, and then also it will have the processor section, and the error handling section it can have, or it may not have. It may have or it may not have. Okay, so that is the thing. Now if we come to the subflow is not having any source section or the error handling section. It is just having the processor section. So this is the subflow, and the difference you can see that the public flow and subflow is like the listener and the source and the error handling section is not there in the subflow. Okay, and there is another flow which is private flow. So whenever a flow is not having anything in the source section, then that flow is considered as private flow. Okay, so here if you see in the private flow, we don't have anything in the source section, and then we have a single event processor, that is logger, in the processor section. Okay, so let me go back to the parts of mule flow. See, if you see, this is source, process, and error handling. Okay, so let me repeat here. So public flow will contain at least one, the listeners or some component it will have in the source section, and then some processor section. This is the minimum requirement for a flow processor. There should be at least one processor in the process section, and then error handling depends upon the choice. If you want to handle, then we can put some error handling section, or it may, if we don't put anything, then it will be handled by mule default error handler. Okay, so that is the thing. So the subflow doesn't have the source section and the error handling section, but private flow, it has the source, process, and error handling section, but source, it will not have any component in the source section. So that's what the difference between these three flows: public flow, subflow, and private flow. So now we will come to the next section, that is calling and observing mule flows, and we will observe these these attributes like attributes, payload, and variables. So let me tell you where from this comes. So if we just see the mule 4 event, so let me tell you when the mule 4 event is created. Suppose I am trying to call a mule flow from outside, from a browser, or I want to use my mule flow from outside my mule application. So in that case, I will post some data, or I will request some service from my mule flow. So in that case, whenever we push a request to our mule flow, that time an event is generated, and that event looks like this. So that is called mule 4 event. So mule 4 event contains three sections. One is the mule message, and then mule variables, mule exception message. These three are the parts of mule 4 event. If you see, mule 4 message is divided in two sections: payload and attributes. Also we have to remember that payload also includes attachments. Okay, so these are the things. These are the parts which we are about to observe during calling one flow from another flow. Okay, let me go back to AnyPoint Studio, and here if you see, from here I am trying to I will in the public flow 2 section we have a listener, and this HTTP listener I have put here, and let me show you the properties of this. So I am using this connector configuration HTTP listener config, and the path is public 2. So let me just try to debug this when I'm deploying the flow so that we can run it. So meanwhile I will take you through with the properties. So here if you see HTTP listener config, so let me tell you that. So this is the Mule application which I have created, exercise dash 1, and this Mule application is having three configuration files. One is global configuration file, then the Mule configuration file 1, and then Mule configuration file 2. Each of these file is having their own private flow, subflow, and public flows. Okay, so let me show you this. Here if you see, the Mule configuration file 1 is having public flow A, and then let me just collapse it. Okay, so public flow A, then public flow B, and then subflow, and also a private flow. Okay, so now uh, in the global configuration we don't have any flow, we have the configuration here. So I have created one HTTP listener config, and this connector configuration I am using, in this connector configuration I am using in the two other files. So that means, so here if you see, I have placed the connector configuration in a single file for better maintainability, and then Mule config, I have used that particular configuration, connector configuration, from Mule configuration file 2 and Mule configuration file 1. Okay, so this is how I have maintained here. Now if you want to create your own, then you have to just click on create, and then you have to type HTTP, and you will find that HTTP listener config is there. Also HTTP request configuration is also coming. So for out of these two, we need the first one, HTTP listener config. So let me tell you what is I have configured there. So it is referring to the localhost, and then this is the port number where I am trying to I mean my service would be available. Okay, so now let's go here, and we will see that our application has been failed. So I was trying to deploy my application, and it has got failed. What is the reason behind it? If you see, I said that a Mule flow should have at least one event processor in the processor section. But if you see the parts of Mule flow, it is not having any event processor here. So what I will do, I will just take a logger here, and I will put it here. Okay, So now I will save it. I'll apply changes, and now let's see if it is deploying or not. Okay, so this should already, I mean, automatically be deployed. So as you can see here, it has taken the change automatically. This is called hard deployment. So now if you see, our application is initializing, and now it should deploy successfully. Let's just wait for a few minutes, a few seconds. As you can see, our application is started, so that means it has been deployed successfully. Okay, so that was the requirement which we saw. So now let's go to our debugging, and just let me just default reset the perspective, reset it. And now as you can see, this is the section, this is the mule debugger perspective. So what I will do, I will drag it here so that I can see them properly. And now as you can see, in the mule configuration 2 file, we are in the mule configuration file 2, and there is public flow 2, and then subflow 2, and also private flow 2. Okay, and parts of mule flow is also there. So can we say that parts of Mule flow is now a private flow? The answer is yes, because it is not having any kind of listener in the source section. It is not having any component in the source section. It is just having it is having one event processor in the processor section. Okay, and that is the logger component. All right, so now we will go to our browser, and we will try to hit our service. Okay, before that, let me show you the path where, so this is public 2. So what, see, http listener config, it is listening to localhost, and then port number is 8081, and then the path is public 2. So what will be our service URL? So it will be http colon slash slash colon sorry colon slash slash localhost, and then 8081, and then it is public 2. So we are basically trying to access HTTP. I mean, we are using HTTP GET method, because whenever you try to do some request from your browser, it is by default it is GET method. Okay, so using HTTP GET method, we have received the request, and if you see, the debugger is currently at the first component in the processor section of public flow. So here, as you can see, the attribute has been created, and it is showing that the caller information. So what was the request path, and where from we have received it. So as you can see, that address and port and URI, everything is there. So these are the attributes which has been created based on the caller. Okay, so attribute basically reflects the information about the caller of that service, and there we can see that payload is also created, and now the variable is also there. So this is the variable section. So if we just go to once again to this mule 4 event, so we can see that attribute has been created. Here is the attribute, and then the payload is there also. So this is the payload. Both of this comes under this mule message. Then there is variables comes under mule 4 event. It is not inside the message. Okay, so variables comes under mule 4 event, and there is exception message. So exception message we won't be able to see here, because there is no exception in our flow. Okay, so when we will talk about exceptions, that time we will see that exception messages. Okay, all right, so let's move forward. And here, if you see, this is the attribute, payload, and variables. Let's move forward. So as you can see, we have to remember that whenever a debug point is we saw any debug point on a component, that component is still not executed. Okay, so it is just before that component. That is what breakpoint means. I think you all know already. So thank you. let's move forward. And then we will see that the payload is still not there because it was a get method, and in the get method we don't post, I mean we don't put any body, we don't use to receive any body, so that is the reason the payload is still empty. Okay, so now we will move forward and we will see that the first payload has been set by this payload from public flow to component. Okay, and now there will be variable section, so we will see a variable is also been has been created. So it is C public variable from public flow 2, this has been created. Okay, and now we are using, this is the main reason we are doing this. So this is the flow using the flow reference component, we are trying to call a subflow here. So now if you see this control will come from this after this flow reference. So from this flow reference we will receive the control, the debug point will come here in the first event processor in the subflow 2. So that means this logger would be actually the first component after this. Okay, so let's move forward and we will see that it has come here. Now the important point is, like, we have to remember what are the thing was passed, what are the things we have received from the public flow 2 to subflow 2 when we called the subflow 2 using the flow reference. Okay, so if you see the attributes section is reflecting the same information which was already there in the public flow 2. Okay, so and then also we have received, let me see the variable section. See, the variable is also has been passed from public flow to subflow 2. And then the payload, if you see the payload, it has been passed from public flow 2 to subflow 2. Okay, so that means whenever we call a flow using flow reference, we basically pass uh, all the attributes which were there, and then all the, I mean the payload which was already there, that thing we also pass, and then the variables which were there, we pass all three of them from the caller flow to the called flow. Okay, so here the caller flow is the public flow 2 and the called flow is subflow 2. So now if you see, we have understood how flow reference passes the control from the parent flow to the called flow. Okay, now let's move forward, and here we are again setting the payload here, and we will see if the payload, what will happen if the payload would be replaced or it would be appended with the existing one. Okay, so let's see what will happen. And the variable section is also there. If you see, variable is only one and attribute is the earlier one. Okay, let's move forward, and here is the result. So if you see, the payload has been replaced with the latest one. So that is the behavior of the set payload component and set payload event processor. So whenever there is any payload existing, it will just replace that payload with the new value. Okay, so now if we come here, and then this is here we are trying to set another variable in the subflow 2. So let's see, here if you see, another variable has been created, and that is also now part of our variable section. So if the question, if someone asks, okay, where underscore subflow 2 remains in the mule event structure. Okay, so there the answer would be the variable section, and the variables basically remains, I mean it stays, it is part of mule 4 event. Okay, it is not part of mule 4 message, it is mule 4 event. Okay, now if you see here, we are using transform message component, and using the transform message component we are trying to update, we are trying to set the attribute. Okay, so now if you see, the attribute is this attribute which currently we are seeing, it has come from the public flow 2, the from the caller flow. Okay, so this, let's see what will happen. Are we going to replace it or we are going to append it? Okay, so now before that, let me show you what is the transform message we have set. So here if you see, the output is set to attributes. So, and the output is set to attributes, and this is the section, the output application slash Java. This is the default output which is there. I haven't changed it, and this is the key and value which we are setting in the attribute section. So let me show you what are other whenever you drag a transform message in your Mule flow, that time by default the output is set to payload. So how to change that? So now if you see this is the button, edit current target. It is mentioned as edit current target. So if you click on this and if you just select from here, then this configuration would be achieved. Okay, so I have selected attribute and then I have clicked on OK. So now, and this is the thing I have put. So we will now go to Mule debugger, and now if you just look the attribute section, because the transform message change attribute value, this one is still not executed. That's the reason we are able to see the earlier attributes which were there. Okay, so now we will move forward and we will see that the attribute will be replaced by the new attributes which we are setting with the transform message. Okay, so now if you see here the attribute section, so we are now at the last event processor in this Subflow 2, and if you see here the attribute has been changed and these are the values. So this is the key and this is the value. Okay, so now we have basically updated the payload and we have added one variable in the Subflow, and then during the execution of the Subflow 2, and then we have also changed the attributes, and now the debug point is staying in the last component, last event processor in this Subflow 2. So now if we move forward, where should the control go? It will go again to the next component after this flow reference, where from the call came. Okay, so the flow reference Subflow 2, after this there is a logger, so here the control will come. So let's see F6, and now if you see the control has again come to return back to our public flow 2. Okay, so now let's have a look in the observation parameters which we mentioned here. So attributes, then payload and variables. Okay, so now let's see what is the attribute is reflecting. See, whatever update we performed in the Subflow 2, it is still visible in our public flow. Okay, so this is how the flow behaves. Okay, so when we call a flow using flow reference, so and after execution of the called flow, when we get back the control, okay, when we get back the control in our caller flow, that time the attributes which are set in the called flow, that attributes are actually visible here. Right now let's see the payload. So if you see the payload, it is also reflecting the latest value which was set in the Subflow 2. So now let's see what is the variable, what is the value set in variables. If you see here, the Subflow 2 variable is also there and the variable public flow 2 is also there. So all these three section, if you see, all are visible to the public flow. Alright, so now let's move forward, and if you press F6, so then again we are trying to call a private flow from our public flow. Okay, so here the control will now go to the private flow. Now the question is, when we will call the private flow 2 using the flow reference, then what will happen? See, whenever we call a flow using flow reference, that call directly goes to the first component in the processor section. Okay, so it won't actually go to the source section. So as we had seen, like a Mule flow can have three sections. One is source, then second is processor, and third one is error handler, right? So here, whenever we call any flow, whether it is a flow, whether it is private flow or a public flow, that time the control will directly go to the first component in the processor section of the called flow. Okay, so now if we just move forward, we will see that the control has come to the private flow 2, and it is currently in the first component in the processor section. Alright, so now let's move forward, and we will again do the similar kind of operation which we did in case of subflow 2, and there we will find that now the payload would be the latest value which is set by our private flow, and then there is another variable we are about to set here. So now if you just see the variable section, there would be another variable added. If you see, the three variables are now showing here. First one is the public flow var underscore public flow 2, which was set by our public flow, and then there is var underscore subflow 2. This one was set in this during the execution of the subflow 2, and then there is the var underscore private flow 2. This one is currently just set by this our earlier component in the private flow 2. Okay, so let's move forward. If you see, again we have used a flow reference here in our private flow, and we are trying to call subflow from our private flow. Okay, so now if we go to the scenario, see, we saw how we are calling the subflow from our public flow. This one we have already covered, and now calling the private flow from public flow, this we have already covered, and now we are in this section. So call subflow from private flow. So this is what we are going to do from this flow reference. Okay, so we are calling the subflow from our private flow, and we want to see what is the behavior. All right, so now let's move forward, and we have to see what is the attribute value. So the attribute, as the attributes which was there in the private flow, that has been passed as it is, as it is from the private flow to our subflow. Okay, so now if we just see the payload is also the latest value which was set from the private flow. All right, so that is the thing. And now the variable section, if we see the variable section, all three variables are actually visible in our subflow. So that means whether it is wherever we use the flow reference, it doesn't matter which flow we are calling, it will pass all the attributes, payload and variables, right? So now let's move forward. Again we are trying to set the payload, and we will see that it will again update, I mean it will replace the payload which was existing there. So it will replace that with the new value. So here current payload is payload from private flow 2. So now if we just move forward, and we will see that the latest payload is payload from subflow 2. So that has been replaced, and now we have to we are seeing that again the flow has come to the set variable section. And here if you see, set variable is basically setting this variable, right, var underscore subflow 2. But the thing is that it is already there in the variable section, var underscore subflow 2. So what will happen? Will it happen that? No, it won't happen. It will just replace the value of that variable with the latest one. Okay, so it will just replace it with the latest one which we have mentioned it here. All right, so let's go to this section. So variables from subflow 2. So this value, as it is hard coded, so that's the reason we will see the same value again, because we have mentioned it as hard coded in this component, right? So basically what will happen, it will replace the existing value which is there. So set variable behaves like, if the variable is existing, then it will replace that with the new value, or if the variable is not existing, I mean if it is not present, in that case it will create it, and then it will assign the value to there. All right, so now again we will move forward. So here is the change attribute value. Again this will also behave in the same manner, like it will replace the attribute which is already there, and then it will set it to the new value, right? Let's move forward, and now here we are again at the last component in this subflow 2. So now the question is where the next where the control will go if we move forward after this. So where should it go? Should it go to this again this public flow logger? No, it won't go there, because the calling was done from this private flow to subflow. So whenever the execution of the subflow is done, then it will come to the next component in the private flow, right? After this flow reference, we will receive the control here. right? So it basically I mean it is similar to the as we call a function from our another function, or it is like that, right? So here if you see the once the execution of the subflow 2 is done, then it will the control will return to our this logger component in the private flow 2. So let's move ahead. Now if you see all these whatever updates we performed in the subflow, these all are again visible to our private flow. So here if you see the attributes are there. So this is the attributes, all right. This is the attributes. And now again all the three variables are still accessible, and then the payload is the latest one which was set in our subflow 2, all right. So now let's move forward, and where if we move forward from here, where should the control go? It should go to the public flow, because the call to the private flow was made from the public flow, right? So from public flow 2 we did call to the private flow 2, and as the execution of the private flow 2 is about to complete, so after this the control will come here after the flow reference private flow 2, right? So let's move forward, and we see that it has come here. So now the question is, what are the parameters we will see here? Like if you see, the payload is now showing as the latest value which was set there. So payload from subflow 2. So why it is that the control has come from private flow 2? Why the payload from private flow 2 is not showing? Because see, the last update was done by the subflow 2, right? So that is the thing. And then the variable section, if you see the variable section, all the three variables are still visible, and the payload is the reflecting the latest value, and the attributes, if you see, the latest values are still visible there, right? So now we will move forward, and we will call another flow which is another public flow. So what is public flow? We said that public flow is having some component in the source section. So when you use a listener in the source section of a public flow, that time that public flow is able to accept the request from outside. So public flow, whenever we are trying to call a public flow, we have two options: either we will use flow reference, or we will use a request component, all right. So if we see the mule palette, and if we go to this http module, there we will find that there is listener as well as there is request, right? So using http request also, we can call another public flow which is http, which is listening on http listener, right? So using http request also we can call, and we can call a mule flow using flow reference, all right. So that is the thing we will see here now. So let's move forward, and it is calling the public flow A. Now let's go back to design view to show you where the public flow A is actually staying there. So if we see the mule configuration file 1 there, if you see, this is the public flow A, all right. So this is the public flow A, and by default it is listening to the to all the flows. See, whenever we in a public flow, if we go inside the listener property, and if we go to the advanced, there we will find that the allowed methods, there is one section which is allowed method. So if we put get there, then that particular flow will listen to only the get method of http, okay. So here we haven't mentioned anything, so that means all the http methods are actually acceptable in this flow, all right. So now what we will do is, like, from here we will call this flow, we will call this public flow A. And if you see, if you remember, I mentioned that whenever we call a flow using flow reference, then that time it doesn't come to the source section, it directly goes to the first component in the processor section, right? So now if we just move forward, let me go to the debugging perspective. And now if we move forward, we will see that the we will see that the flow will come to this section. Okay, so let me put a breakpoint here. So now we will move forward from here, and we will see what are the things passed from public flow 2 to public flow A. All right, so now let's move forward, and here we go. So now the control is at the first component in the public flow A processor section, right? So now if we see what is the attribute has been passed. So all three attributes which were there, or all three, I mean all three sections like attributes, payload and variables, whatever was there earlier to our flow reference, wherefrom we called this public flow A. So all those three sections are passed from public flow 2 to public flow A. Alright, so now we will move forward, and we will see again we are trying to do the similar kind of operation. We are trying to update the payload, and now if you see, the payload has been replaced with the new value, and there will be another variable added using the set variable component. So now if you see, there is another variable, and this is the variable which has been set right now. And now we are in the last processor section in our public flow, and we will, after this, where should the control go? It will go to again to the mule configuration file to public flow 2. Okay, so this will be the component where the control will come if we move forward. So let's move forward, and here is the component, here is the control debugger. And now if we see that all the updates which were done by the public flow, which we called using flow reference, all those three sections, attribute, payload and variables, all are reflecting the latest values, right? So whatever changes we made in the public flow A, all those changes are actually visible to our caller flow, right? So this is what I wanted to show you, because whenever we have two options, right? So see, the important thing we have to remember is, like, whenever we are calling a subflow or a private flow, we have only one option, right? We have the option to use flow reference, or we can also use, we can call that subflow or public flow, private flow, using the flow reference. But in case we have public flow and we want to call a public flow from another public flow, in that case we have two options. We have the request operation of HTTP, and then also we have flow reference. See, I am talking about the REST services here. We are developing is the REST service, we can say. So using the HTTP method, we can actually interact with the public flows, right? So as whenever a flow is having a listener at the source section, that time we can call that service call that flow from outside our Mule application. When I say outside our Mule application, it could be someone from internet, or it could be I can post some request using the postman or an advanced REST client, or I can do some request using my browser, like I did right now. All right. So now if I see the response of my request is still it has not come yet, right? So if I just move forward, and I will see that the payload which is currently there in this which is currently there, it will be the actual response which will be written as the response to our browser. Okay, so let's move forward, and we will see that the response is here. So the payload from public flow A. All right, so that is the thing we have seen. And now let's see what are the things. So call public flow from another public flow, this scenario also we have covered. And now the questions comes. So let's say, which mule flows can be called from outside of Mule application? So only answer is only public flow public mule flow or the public flow. All right. So see, this thing we here we need to remember that whenever we call mule flow, by default actually we understand the public flow. All right. So in case we are using subflow or private flow, that time we need to mention explicitly. All right. So that is what. And the next question is, what is the difference between public and private flow, private mule flow? So private flow cannot be called from outside, as it is not having anything in the source section, any listener, it is not having any listener. That's the reason we won't be able to call private flow directly from outside of our mule application. But in case of public flow, we can call it. All right. So now the third question is, what is the difference between private flow and subflow? So private flow can have the error handling section, but the subflow doesn't have. Also there is, if we go to the mule this subflow section, let's say, so subflow also, subflow mule subflow can have only processes section, right? We can see that it is having only processes section, it is not having any source section or the error handling section. All right. So now let me tell you another thing, like whenever we call a subflow from any caller flow, so that time the subflow is considered as part of caller flow only. Okay. So this is the behavior, like it is executed as part of that particular caller flow. So it is not considered as a separate component, it is considered as part of that one. But in case we are calling private flow from any other flow, in that case the private flow is considered actually a separate part, and that is executed like that is executed as a separate part. All right. So it is not considered as the part of the caller flow. It is like the in case of parent child relationship, we can say that the caller flow can be considered as the parent, but and the private flow can be considered as child, because in case of subflow is considered as part of, if we call a subflow from a parent flow, it will be considered as part of parent flow only. It won't be considered, the execution won't be considered as a separate component. It would be like whenever we call a subflow, the main thing is whenever we call a subflow, that time it is considered as, the execution is considered as part of that flow only. Like here in the subflow 2 we have 5 event processes, like, right? So where from we are calling this subflow, we are calling this subflow from the public flow 2 using the flow reference. So in when we call the subflow using the flow reference, the behavior is like, if we just put this all five of these processors from subflow 2 to in place of this flow reference, if we place all 5 of this processor here in place of flow reference subflow 2, then the behavior would be same, like all right. So it is like whenever we call a subflow from any flow, then the subflow is not actually considered as different part, it is considered as part of the caller flow only. All right. So that is the thing. So here with what is the fourth question? It is how to call subflow from private flow. So using flow reference event processor, we have already seen this, and which flow can act as child flow, so flow or private flow. So we, as I mentioned, that private flow, because subflow is executed as like it is a part of the same calling flow. All right. So hence the subflow is not considered as a separate one. All right. So that is the thing. And the sixth question comes, what is the use of subflow then? So see, the use of subflow is to put some repetitive processors, like we suppose there are some components which we are trying to use in multiple flows. All right. So in multiple flows, so that means instead of putting all those processors again and again in those flows, we can gather them and put them inside a subflow, and we can then call the subflow as many times as we want, as needed, right? So that is the thing. The answer is to follow modular design. So we can use subflow so that we can place repetitive processes in a separate flow and call them as many times as needed. So now the seventh question comes, what is passed from caller flow to called flow when we call the second from the first using the flow reference? So as we have already seen, whenever we use flow reference to call a flow, then attributes, payload and variables, all three are passed from the caller flow to called flow. All right, so that is a observation which we have done today. And there is another help link which I would like to share here. So if you want more information regarding the difference between private flows and subflows, you can go to this link. So that is what that is the thing for today. I would like to thank you, thank you for your time. And please, if this is helpful, please like, share and subscribe. And thank you all. Have a good day. Yeah.